Well, Gaby, good to see you. Thanks for jumping on Venture Grounds. I would love for you to give a little background on yourself and tell us more about Primary.
Of course. Great to be here and good to see you again. I'm Gaby. I'm an investor at Primary Venture Partners. I focus on infrastructure. That focus really comes from my background. I was a data scientist before joining the firm. I primarily worked on recommendation systems, which underpin a lot of our favorite tools like Netflix, Google, et cetera. I grew up in a family of academics. My dad was a professor. He taught entrepreneurship, which I didn't really think impacted me until here I am in venture. I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland. I love to run. And I came to Primary really wanting to support founders who are building tools for the person I once was as a data scientist. And so getting to invest in infrastructure gets to do just that. As for Primary, we are New York's biggest seed fund. We've been around for over a decade. We're currently investing out of our fourth fund. We're wrapping that up, which is really exciting. And we feel really excited about the path forward for both New York and for the broader entrepreneurial ecosystem at seed. We lead seed rounds. Like I said, I focus on infrastructure, but my colleagues focus on everything from industrials, healthcare, fintech. We run the full gamut. We also have one of the biggest operational teams in seed to really provide resources to our founders. And so what that looks like is best said by the work they actually do. We hired over 150 people into our portfolio company with our recruiting team last year.
Incredible.
We are doing a ton of work on go-to-market, generating millions in pipeline for our companies. And so putting our money where our mouth is and investing in resources to support our companies.
I love that. And your office is incredible too.
We, so not much better in this space.
Thank you for that. So getting right into it, across the founders you've backed, what's the early signal that tells you a founder is actually seeing around corners?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that we think about when we talk to founders is we always talk about early stage being a CEO. It's a lot like playing a game of chess. You always have to be 2 to 3 games ahead of everybody. And if you are a chess player, not sure if you are, but something that chess players love to do is go through all the permutations of what could possibly happen in their market, on their board, before they actually make a move. And so I think that founders that have this really great ability to say, we're at 30,000 feet, this is where the state of our market is and what could happen, what might happen. But then also those founders who can say, I know what my next move is. And so it's this ability to really kind of balance between, I'm up here, I know my market really well, I have this high level understanding of what's going on, but also I understand what I need to do today, this hour, in this meeting, et cetera. And so it's this ability to operate between both really high level and really low level, kind of executing on that path. And I think sometimes founders who are able to show that the best, what that actually looks like is the ability to, sell their vision to any type of person. They understand how to talk to you as a podcast host, but also as your role at Row.
Like a third grader.
They know how to talk to a third grader. They know how to talk to an investor. They know how to talk to a public markets investor, a seed stage investor, and being able to kind of flex between those roles and those end personas shows their ability to map out the chessboard and then communicate that really well. And so that to me is what seeing around corners looks like, is knowing, your opponent's next couple of moves. And your opponent isn't just a competitor. It's not always just about beating competition. It's really about just understanding how the market dynamics are going to play out in your industry.
Wow, thank you. What are the best founders you've seen do that clearly separates them from everyone else?
I think something that we are seeing just totally break away the best companies is how they think about attracting talent. It sounds so obvious. And before I was in venture, I would have said the best companies have the best people working at them. That sounds so clear. Yeah. It sounds so obvious. But attracting talent is so much more than just hiring the person whose pedigree shows that they are the best fit for that role, or hiring the person who is deemed an expert by the world in XYZ field. Yes, of course, if you're working on something in semiconductors, you want someone who's done that before. If you are working on something in agents and infrastructure, it would be great to have someone who's built those things at scale. But there's also really fresh perspectives that people are bringing that, talent leaders and CEOs are trying to find those people and really cultivate them internally. And so we always tell our founders, how do you think about becoming a talent magnet? That's many things. That's one, what does your brand look like to people on the outside? What does it look like to work at a company like your company? What is the story to market about what you guys are up to? And how do you really encourage people to want to be a part of that culture and make it something that, people are really excited about referrals? That's something that I love is, we have a lot of portfolio companies where most of their hires actually come from referrals.
The best
and
hires.
That's the best thing.
Yeah.
And that's a great encouragement for, one, you have people who are excited about working there and they tell their friends, but that also just shows the ability to really attract great talent. I think also on attracting talent, it's really important to see how founders can move also out of that referral kind of radius. It's really important to hire people you love working with, hire your friends, people that you've had experiences working with in the past, but how can you go land that top seller at your competitor? Or how can you go land that, top biz ops person at Google, Anthropic, DeepMind, wherever it might be? And so those types of really challenging hires, being able to make those are the ones we see our portfolio companies just really can stand out and make them a really attractive place to work in the long term.
Would you say that like the best CEOs are spending a good amount of time actually like hunting for talent?
Yeah.
Like that's a big part of that job, right?
Totally. I mean, I think that there are times that we tell founders, like, you just need to be spending more time hiring.
Yeah.
Like, it is so critical. It's so crucial. And I think it's actually very surprising to a lot of founders when they first join. I work with a lot of engineers. Investing in infrastructure means you're constantly working with CTOs and CEOs who come from an engineering background. And to say, okay, now go hire.
Your muscle.
A lot of times they're like, this is not my muscle. Like, this is not what I know to do. And so finding ways to encourage them on how to do that, best practices, all of that. Frameworks. And yes, there's so much you can write down. But honestly, at the end of the day, it just has to be about them and their urge to really, like you said, go hunt for those best hires.
They're selling the dream to them too.
It's all, a lot of being a founder comes back to selling stock. We talk about that a lot. That's selling stock to investors. That's selling stock to your own team. That's selling stock to the market and just broader brand. But I think so much of the hiring game is really about, the CEO's willingness to take on that responsibility and understanding how to prioritize that. And that really early investments in talent can just pay like incredible dividends over time. Your most important hires are the first couple, and obviously they continue to be important over the life of the business, but you really early set a strategic vision by who you actually bring on.
Expanding more on that, when you meet a founder for the first time, how do you tell whether their conviction is earned insight?
So it's interesting. One thing I always thought prior to investing was that the best companies were built by people who operated in that industry before. The best fintech companies came from people who were in finance. The best infrastructure companies came from VPs of Eng. And so I think that is where a lot of earned insight comes from. People who have operated in those markets, understand them better than anyone else, and have really lived and breathed the pain that they're now building for. But the other way that earned insight just comes from is just true customer obsession. And I think that's a phrase that a lot of VCs throw around is like, be customer obsessed. But like, truly, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And it shows up in different ways. But understanding like, what does it take for your customer to be excited to buy your product? What does it take for your customer to put down $100,000, to put down $1 million to buy your product? What gets your customer promoted? Like, what are the things that your product can do to really improve the life of your customer? And how can you just get in their mind and in their like, what's their roadmap? What do they want to do for their business? And how can your product be a part of that? And that doesn't have to come from you understanding engineering or understanding semiconductors. That can come from time spent in the industry, through shadowing, through learning from people, just general curiosity.
Go visit your customer in person, spend time in their office, just talking for an hour.
Exactly. I think that's exactly what it is. And that customer obsession really, like I said, shows up in different ways. And there are incredible founders who have built businesses by coming from that domain and then going to execute and saying, I know everybody in this category. I can really show my stuff here. There's also incredible founders that have done the opposite of that, which is I'm fresh to the space. I bring a new, fresh perspective. I'm deeply obsessed with this customer and I know their pain. And I've learned that through earning insights, through shadowing, going to their workplace, becoming a part of Slack groups that this person is in, like really getting an understanding of what makes that person, like what makes their job so hard, what makes your product do that better. I think that's how you tell about like an earned insight versus just like, this is a nice story.
Yeah. I love that. Your founders often tackle markets with formidable incumbents. What do they understand about competing with those incumbents that most early founders miss? Yeah.
So I think that one of the things about particularly the semiconductor industry, which is an industry that obviously has been getting a lot more buzz in the past couple of years, but if we look to the past 2 decades, it really hasn't seen the same amount of innovation that a lot of other industries have seen. And that's been largely because of the mechanics of that industry. It operates in many duopolies. We have Nvidia and AMD. We have Cadence and Synopsys. We have these really, really big players and many hundreds of billions, if not trillions of market cap that are owning those markets. And startups have been nervous to compete with them.
Of course.
And that comes for a good reason. They're vertically integrated. They have incredible margins. They have done a really good job of optimizing over decades. But there's two things that founders can really optimize on that is making an opportunity now that I think is really critical. And this is unique to the semiconductor industry, but I think has a lot of correlations to others. The first is tailwinds. And there are tailwinds that any company, an incumbent or a startup, can take advantage of. But one in particular that comes to mind around really competing with incumbents in the semiconductor space right now is tailwinds that we're seeing around national security, reshoring, domestic supply chain resilience. All of these things are opportunities that US-based startups have a really incredible opportunity to take and say, we want to be the US version of this company. Or
Best time to build here.
Exactly. There's a ton of enforcement around why now is a good time to build in the States. All of this, again, is exacerbated by how amazing AI is as a market and driving demand for this industry. But there's tailwinds. And then the second thing about how you really compete with an incumbent is we always think about what's an innovator's dilemma in this market. So innovator's dilemma is obviously it's a phrase people love to use in economics, et cetera. But what we think about is what is some sort of product or decision that you can make that if your competitor, your incumbent made that, it would ultimately, be bad for their business or it would impede on their existing business. And so there are opportunities where startups can do things like, cut costs, offer lower costs. They can bring a new technology to market. They can find these gaps within their incumbents, current roadmap that they can then find an opportunity in. And again, like I said, whether it be, riding on the backs of an incredible tailwind or, using an incredible tailwind to grow your momentum or finding this innovator's dilemma among an incumbent or around an incumbent, both of those things are very incredible right now because of AI and the demand we're seeing in this market. But these incumbents are, I think one thing that founders sometimes say is we're going to beat our incumbent because we're going to move faster. That is not the case. Yeah. And Jensen keeps us on our toes. Exactly. You're going to need to do that. But Jensen keeps us on our toes. Every day he's releasing something new that is, and every CEO of all of the semiconductor startups or every CEO of the semiconductor public companies are doing this is they're moving really quickly.
Yeah,
and
they're aware people are coming for them.
They are aware. And so you can't win on just speed. Speed is so important. Yeah. Speed is the most important thing in a lot of cases. But you can't be saying, we're a startup, we're nimble, we're quick.
Yeah.
It's a great thing to do. But incumbents are also really well positioned to move into markets that they can move very quickly too. And so finding tailwinds that you can ride, finding incredible tailwinds and really finding these innovators' dilemmas, I think are really incredible opportunities for startups.
I feel like I always end up saying like speed and communication are like some of the most important things, like being in an office, working with each other. Like just if you can communicate faster with each other to solve problems or listen to customers, it's like that's kind of a big leg up against a lot of these larger companies where you have multiple layers to go through.
Totally.
Right? What's the tactic your best founders use that consistently lets them beat incumbents who should crush them?
It's funny because I just said this wasn't the thing, but urgency is one of them. Urgency is definitely one of those tactics. And I think focus. There is so much that these incredible incumbents cover. If you look at the roadmap for any big GPU company, any big memory company, they are trying to do a lot of things. And that comes from the fact that they've been around for decades and they have the ability, they have the talent, they have the capital to go do these things. But startups really benefit a ton from focus. And focus is an incredible way to compound value over time. It's an incredible way to hire the best people and move towards a single mission. Focus on one thing. And I think that focus ultimately ends up becoming something that does differentiate founders that are, trying to boil the ocean versus founders that are saying, this is our mission, this is the product we're releasing, here's every step between A and Z on how we want to get there. And we don't need to compete with everything that our competitors are doing. We're going to just focus on what we think we can do best. And there will come a time where you're going to need to be at feature parity. You're going to need to compete across a multitude of products. But the ability to truly say we're going to focus on one thing is something that startups can really do to beat incumbents in the early days.
Have you noticed that, like, maybe, obviously investing at the seed stage, some of these companies might come to you and they have customers in maybe a couple different segments.
Yeah.
Like, how are you guys a little bit more hands-on and we're like, hey, like in helping them focus, like, I think this might be a better long-term fit and, versus trying to, boil the ocean too.
Yes. So one thing that was a surprise to me as well when I joined venture was that sometimes having revenue from a multitude of customer groups can show that there might be a lack of focus. That's not the case for all startups, but that can sometimes be, a sign that, hey, maybe we're not really understanding what our core value is for the product. And so when we think about like what is the core product functionality and who are the customer segments that can work best for, I think that's where we really try to direct our founders, energy is think about that core functionality, think about what needs to be built into your product to serve your best, most excited, customer who the value shows for the most. And if there are some ancillary markets where that can work really well that end up folding value back into our core market, that's great. But typically, again, it goes back to focus. If you are focusing on the right market, there's a ton of opportunity in a market, depending on what market you're starting in. But if you're starting in a big market, there's usually a ton of opportunity within just that one customer segment. So we always recommend to focus, given the fact that can really just drive a lot of value from the product perspective of where your customers can win. I think this is why we're seeing a lot of vertical AI wins right now at the application layer. There is just so much value that comes from compounded learnings from your end customer. So if you're building customer support for one market, you might want to tackle, every airline before you go tackle a million other players. Yeah. But we're also seeing a lot of people win in horizontal software. And so this is, again, goes back to the CEO's ability to kind of navigate what that means for their product, what that means for their go-to-market teams, and then ultimately how they scale beyond just one single customer segment.
Yeah, it'd be 3 chess moves ahead.
Yeah, exactly. It all comes back to chess.
I need to learn. What's one bold early decision your best founders made that you wish more first-timers had the guts to make?
Investing in brand and marketing. And investing is in time, in the founder's time and the CEO's time, and investing in capital. I think whenever you talk to a seed stage founder, they have that slide on their pitch deck that says use of funds. I almost never see brand and marketing on that deck. And when I do, I'm like, okay, let's talk about that. Let's talk a little bit more about that. It's no fault of their own if brand and marketing isn't on that slide because it ultimately ends up becoming a place where a lot of people spend. But typically CEOs are just thinking about those things I've already mentioned of hiring and getting customers. But so much can compound on top of your brand and what you are saying to market, matters a lot more than just what your website looks like. But it's how are you getting your voice out there? How are you meeting your customers in the social media channels that they're in? How are you meeting them at the conferences they're at? What is the way you present yourself in a sales meeting? Do you have great sales collateral? And there are a lot of things that come to brand. Yes, it's logo, it's the name of the company, it's having a good website. And I think a lot of times founders might think of that as, spoilerplate, this is what we do. Let's make a quick website and move on. But more than ever in today's day and age, we're seeing that distribution and getting in front of the right people is becoming such an important quality for companies. And a lot of that just comes from how their brand and their story resonates in market. Mm-hmm. And so I find that founders who are able to think critically, especially in markets that are a little bit funkier, maybe more close to deep tech or frontier tech, where your narrative and owning that narrative is really important. I love working with a founder who's really excited about saying, what's the brand we want to tell? Or what's the story we want to tell? How do we want our brand to represent that story? And how am I willing to put both capital and my time behind making sure that narrative is what I want to tell to the market?
Yeah. So it's super important to be thinking about that, even at the seed stage.
Totally. I mean, I think
have a vision.
100%. I mean, having a vision on what you want your company to be next year versus in 5 years and what that looks like to the market. What does that look like to your customers? What does that look like to your investors? What does that look like to, people you're looking to hire? And if you think about the companies that you know the most, you probably think of their branding. You probably think of their, incredible pop-ups they're doing in New York and the swag that people are wearing. And that's not always the most important thing, of course. Yeah. It's an incredible thing that really, large growing companies can get to do. But I'm sure a lot of those founders were thinking about that in the early days of like, what is the vision I have for what this brand is going to look like once we hit scale? Yeah. And so I think it's something that is a bold take for a lot of founders. Again, working with a lot of engineers, that's not the first tool in their toolkit to say, let's talk about brand. And so how can you kind of get people to move into an area that they're a little bit more uncomfortable with and take some risks on thinking about brand and marketing?
Yeah. Try stuff and just see what
works.
Try it. Like do a podcast.
We live in, exactly, do a podcast with Jason. We live in the easiest world for testing and failing. Yeah. The world gives us feedback far faster than we want it sometimes. And I think that more startups should take that to their advantage and get that feedback.
Love it. Espresso round. What's one view you hold about the market that most investors would disagree with?
We're too early for agent infrastructure. I mean, there's a lot of infrastructure shifts or there's a lot of past technology markets that you see that infrastructure is actually built out after you see the application layer develop more. And so if we look back to cloud, a company like Datadog actually emerged after there was far more apps that we needed to be doing observability and monitoring for. And so my take on agents is we have a lot of really incredible frameworks and foundational tools, But until we have massive large-scale deployments, and we have some incredible, really large-scale deployments, don't get me wrong, but until it really permeates, we're going to see really a new metamorphosis of how people are building agent infrastructure over the next couple of years. And I'm excited to be investing in and meeting those founders that are saying, I know we did this maybe in 2024, 2025, but all of these problems were exposed once we actually put these things in production at scale. And now here's the solutions and the toolkits that we know we need to build agents for 2030, 2040.
Love it. What's one conviction you've completely rethought in the past year?
That you need to be a domain expert to win. I think, as I mentioned, there is a narrative that, the best founders build in markets they know the best. And a lot of times that comes from having operated or been a first-time founder in that market before. And that's not always the case. And AI is teaching us that you can learn really quickly, you can get in touch with your customers quickly, you can iterate on product really quick. And those are not things that we had before. And so incredible founders that have come from domains are building in those domains, but we're also seeing this really fresh talent come from areas that they don't have experience in, learn and grow and move really quickly into those markets.
Yeah, best time to build a company. Who's a company, founder, or sector you're fascinated by at the moment and why?
A sector is consumer hardware. There is a lot of parallels into the infrastructure space in terms of what I cover around as hardware gets better, we get to actually run larger models and smaller devices. And so we're seeing Apple is going to make a big push here. We're going to see, a lot more wearables move into the space because we'll be able to run really powerful models on, instead of 10,000 GPUs, on a single pendant or a watch or something like that. But we're also going to see, consumer robotics really take off, where everyone's going to have a Neo in their home next year.
Maybe a little scary. Just don't make them look like people.
There you go. Exactly. But we're going to see a real, resurgence of consumer hardware, I think, over the next year. And maybe since the iPhone, we haven't seen something like that before. And I'm really excited for what that's going to look like.
I love that. And maybe even diving a little bit deeper on that, like, why do you think there's never been a better time to maybe build in consumer hardware? Because of onshoring and a lot of the other, like, people are obviously open to investing more in physical products, in consumer, because you can iterate faster.
Yeah, I think historically, a lot of people have said hardware is hard. People don't want to invest in hardware. There's capital intensity that comes with it. There is, a tricky way to balance really like how you build these products, your supply chains, and all of those things. Like you mentioned, there's incredible tailwinds for building these things in the States and people who are really thinking about how you bring manufacturing here. But I think even more so, the opportunity of why now is really great for consumer hardware is, one, the new experiences that we get to actually have with AI. There is, no way that my Chorus watch that I have right here can talk back to me, because this was, probably built and designed in a world prior to, the AI the conversational AI we know and love today. So we're getting to see new experiences come to smaller form factors. And we're also just seeing a consumer shift in terms of people's interest in actually using these devices. I think, launches like what Neo is doing or what Sunday Robotics is doing is an incredible proof point around people really are excited about having a robot in your house for the first time in a really long time in terms of, the massive amount of people that want these things.
Yeah.
We always thought that robots were things that were meant for factories and things that were meant for work that was behind closed doors. And now we're seeing a real shift in consumer sentiment around, hey, maybe I do want a Ring that can, listen to my conversation and send me follow-ups. Or maybe I do want a pendant that looks like really nice jewelry, but is actually helping me get through my day in terms of keeping me on track. And maybe I do want more than just a Roomba, but a product. Or
more than just like your health data.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I think it's that shift in consumer sentiment and then the ability to manufacture these products faster.
Demand's there.
For sure.
100%. Love it.
Yeah.
Well, that's it. That's all I got.
Amazing.
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. It was so awesome. Appreciate it.